this episode, I'll show you how I created this night shot in Quito, Ecuador.
Adorama TV presents Exploring Photography with Mark Wallace, where you will learn innovative techniques on shooting a wide range of photography. Here's your host.
Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Exploring Photography right here on Adorama TV, brought to you by Adorama. It's the camera store with everything for photographers. Well, I'm here in Quito, Ecuador, and I got here a couple days ago, and I knew I wanted to shoot something of the city. I just didn't know exactly what I wanted to shoot. And so today, I'm going to walk you through the process of me creating this image. Now, when I travel, I like to break up my shooting into two parts. The first part is scouting, and the second part is shooting. When I scout, what I'm really doing is trying to get a feel for the city, look and see what's interesting, and figure out a plan for my shoot. So let's take a look at my scouting process. My day began by exploring the city. I walked the streets, listened to the sounds, and looked for inspiration. I began thinking I would shoot images of people, and so I spent time in Plaza Grande, just watching the locals and getting a sense of the space. As I watched the crowds, I decided it would be better to shoot the scene from above. So I began to look for a higher vantage point. As I climbed, I began to see the city from a distance and decided a scenic photo would be even better. So I began to look for even higher ground. I found this walking bridge and I thought it would be a fantastic place to shoot. You can see the city right here. It's unobstructed by any power lines or anything. But I also knew that it wasn't a great time to shoot. So I wanted to come back at night or at close to sunset. Now that meant that I'm going to be shooting in low light or maybe even in the dark. So what I did in the daylight is I grabbed my camera. I've got a 16 to 35 millimeter lens, and I just sort of looked and figured out exactly where I wanted to shoot. So when I got my tripod, I could set everything up. And if I planned that in the daylight, I wouldn't be fumbling around at night. So once I had all this set up and figured out my composition, I marked my position on my GPS watch, and then I headed back to the hotel to plan everything out. But before we do that, let's check out this contest from Adorama. Using the GPS coordinates from my watch, I was able to use the photographer's Ephemeris to determine when sunset would be and where the light would fall in my exact location. Well, at first I was discouraged because I learned that the sun was going to set directly behind that hill, which means I wasn't going to get that great golden hour effect that I really wanted. The sun wasn't going to be streaming across the rooftops. But I also checked the local weather and learned that we're going to have really overcast skies. And that turned out to be good news because as the sun was going over that hill, it would actually illuminate those skies and it would give me a nice well-lit sky that could contrast against the city lights below. Now I set up my tripod in the same position that I had scouted earlier, and I'm using a Canon 16 to 35 millimeter lens. I set the camera to aperture priority mode and set my aperture around f9, and that made sure that everything was tack sharp and I had great depth of field so you could make sure you could see every little detail. Now I got here about 30 minutes before sunset, and after everything was set up, I shot a frame about every 5 to 10 minutes. And that would make sure I got a lot of variety in the sky and how the light was changing. And I shot everything in RAW so I could make sure I had a lot of different post-production options as well. Once I had everything done, I loaded my photos into Lightroom, and you can see how the light changes dramatically as I go through these. This is the very first shot of the night. This is about 15-20 minutes before sunset, and you can see it's really bland. Compared to the last shot of the night, this is about 30 minutes after sunset, and you can see that the sun is actually behind the cloud or behind the mountains, but it's still illuminating the sky, and this little red area right here is actually a reflection of the city lights themselves. So if we go back here and look at sort of the progression of the light, you can see that it is changing, not so much at first. We're waiting for the sun to go down, waiting for the sun to go down, waiting for the sun to go down, and right about here you can see that the city changes. Right there, see how these lights come on? And so there's nothing, here's the city lights, and then we see things changing dramatically over the next 5 or 10 minutes. And things really pop. So this is the image that I chose. As I progress after this, you can see that it looks a little bit more like lava, I think. But the reason I didn't choose these later images, even though they're pretty dramatic, is if I look at this one, this is the one I chose. Check out this, this building right here. You can still see all the details. We have this that I don't like. It's just flaring into the lens. But you can see all of the buildings. Everything has details, so I can really see the details of the city. You can see how tack sharp this is, shooting at f9 with that 16 to 35 millimeter lens. If I zip to some of these later images, which I really like the color of them, but you can see that all of these buildings here are just washed out, and this flare right here is just a little bit too much. And so I went back to the original, and you see these are overexposed. If I played with that exposure a little bit, I was losing details in this guy. So I went back to this image here as my winner. Now, what did I do to this image? It's pretty simple. If I open up my develop module panel here, I'll show you exactly what I did. It was just very, very minimal adjustments. And so I changed my exposure just a bit, so about 3/4 of a stop. So I changed that so it's down just a bit. I increased my contrast a touch. Really the big changes I made here were I opened up the highlights, opened up the shadows, so we'd have details here in the city. And because I underexposed this in Lightroom, I wanted to open up the sky a little bit more. So I increased the highlights there. I took the whites down because we were getting some, losing some details in this, the whites right here, the whites right here. So I took that down. I left the blacks alone. I increased the clarity and the vibrance so we just get a little bit more color. I changed the color temperature just a bit, so I changed that to about 5426 Kelvin. And then the other thing I did was I increased the saturation of my blues because I wanted the sky to be a little bit more dramatic. And then the last thing I did is I went down here and I enabled my lens profile correction so that, so with this wide angle lens, if I undo that, you can see that this looks a little bit like it's distorted. And when I click that again, you can see that that flattens the image out. So that's really the only thing that I did to this image, and here is the result. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Exploring Photography. Now don't forget, you can subscribe for free so you don't miss a single episode of anything on Adorama TV. So why don't you click the subscribe button right now, and also check out the Adorama Learning Center where we have articles and tips and tricks for all of your photography and video needs. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you again next time.
Do you want great looking prints at low cost? Be sure to visit our easy to use online printing service. Adorama Pix has professionals who treat your images with the utmost care that you can count on. For a quick turnaround on photos, cards, or albums, use AdoramaPix.com.